So plants also need nutrients. So remember that the nutrients are the building blocks. So the energy they obtain from light to build carbohydrates like glucose and cellulose, but they also need nutrients. And so one interesting example of an organism or a plant that obtains nutrients in an interesting way would be the Venus flytrap. So these are carnivorous plants. If we look at the structure of the Venus flytrap, you'll notice that they are green and that they have leaves, but they also have these structures, modified leaves that they use as traps. And this functions to attract. They attract the insect and then they close. Electrical impulses allow the plant to close, and then they release an enzyme that digests the organism. So they're not obtaining energy from eating insects, but they are obtaining some important nutrients, and those would be nitrogen and phosphorus. So if we look at, they obtain nitrogen and phosphorus from eating insects. So they are an example of a carnivorous plant. However, they obtain their energy through photosynthesis. The reason why they have developed this adaptation is that this allows them to live in soils that are not rich in nutrients. So for example, maybe that is the limiting resource for their growth would be nitrogen and phosphorus. So they've come up with this alternative mechanism for obtaining those essential nutrients in order to build their tissues, like build the proteins that are important in their cells, and to build their DNA, which also has phosphorus and nitrogen in it. And so if we look at how most plants obtain their nutrients, most plants obtain these through inorganic sources. So most plants obtain nitrogen and phosphorus through inorganic sources. So inorganic means that they're not digesting the proteins that are found in an insect's body, right? So this would include NO3, which is a form of nitrogen, which is called nitrate, and PO4, which is a form of nitrogen called phosphate. And so when we look at, say, for example, fertilizers, when you decide you're going to fertilize your garden, you could add inorganic sources of nitrate and phosphate. And so this actually makes up a ratio that you see on fertilizer bags. And this is actually referred to as the red field ratio. So it is the amount of nitrogen to phosphorus. So by definition, the red field ratio is the amount of nitrogen to phosphorus. And that's a ratio, so there's a little dot there, to phosphorus. So for example, you could have a ratio of 16 to 1. So when we look, we're going to talk about how this nitrogen gets into the soil when we talk about the nitrogen biogeochemical cycle. So nitrogen is in our atmosphere, and there are some bacteria that are able to take it out of the atmosphere and incorporate it into these organic sources. And then the plants are able to take them up. So This is why nitrogen and phosphorus are really important nutrients, because they are often referred to as limiting nutrients. Because if you don't have these nutrients, then that is going to limit the growth of the plant. And so this is called Liebig's law of the minimum. So let's go to Liebig's law of the minimum. This is the idea that plants, the growth of the plants is determined by the nutrient that is least available to the plant. So nitrogen is a very common limiting resource or limiting nutrient. So I'll just put nitrogen and phosphorus are very common. So we'll look at what happens if you have excessive amounts of nitrogen. So sometimes if you let nitrogen go into water and even phosphorus go into water, sometimes that causes algae to undergo what is referred to as a bloom. And then that can be bad because if our algae grows excessively, it will then die. And as it is decomposing, oxygen will be used up from the water. And so seeing an algae bloom, say, for example, in a river, is a sign that there has been excessive nutrients that have been added to the soil and have leached out of the soil and gotten into our streams. And so that causes a different type of problem, is that would be what is referred to as eutrophication. So excessive nutrients in waters can lead to what is called eutrophication. Because it can cause excessive growth of things like algae or cyanobacteria in the water.